This week, we're talking about Global Visioneering Workshop.
Its mission is essentially to inspire and empower humanity to achieve breakthroughs that accelerate a hopeful future for all. There's been, more than $100 million in investment by 27 different teams from 7 countries. And this ended up in a $6 billion IPO by Virgin Galactic, which was the winning team of the prize.
You're not surrounded by entrepreneurs who are looking to build the next food delivery app, right? You're next to entrepreneurs that are solving massive problems.
Right. The big vision is, in a world in 2050, how do we ensure that we move away from kind of this dystopian Mad Max reality and that we seem to be heading in, and ensure that we live in a world of abundance and human flourishing, like we've mentioned before.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. This week, we're talking about an exciting event that Nikos just got back from. He just got back from the Global Visioneering Workshop was it in Los Angeles, Nikos?
That's right, LA.
In LA. And he has a lot to share with us today. It sounded like a really exciting, insightful event. So, Meeks, good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
So we've had back to back. We've had 3 episodes back to back where we've had guests, and we thought we'd switch it up this week. And since you just got back from this event, and I want to hear all about it, let's get into it.
Okay,
so,
awesome.
The Global Visioneering Workshop, right, in LA.
Yes.
And I believe this is led by Peter Diamandis.
That's right. Peter D.
So how did this come to be? What motivated you to attend this workshop? I love the name, by the way, Global Visioneering Workshop.
Yeah, Global Visioneering. And I was basically doing my duty. It's not something that you can just hop up and say, hey, I want to be a global visioneer and volunteer, right? This is considered volunteering work, but I was asked, and I was invited by Alexander Nicholas, who is the lead of the cohort for Learning Society and Technology, right? So just a little bit of background. You mentioned Peter D., who came from Singularity University and started the prize. I think it was the early 90s, like 1994. So what is the X Prize? Its mission is essentially to inspire and empower humanity to achieve breakthroughs that accelerate a hopeful future for all, right? And this comes in the form of a donation vehicle to create Moonshot projects in the form of prizes across 4 main categories: climate and ecology, health, learning and society, which is what I was a part of, and deep tech, which includes quantum mechanics and all of the good things in AI. I could have actually gone in between cohorts, and there's opportunities for cross-pollination, obviously. But every few years, a cohort of a group of about 50 people, the best of the brightest in their fields across the domains that I had just mentioned, are invited to design prizes and these moonshots around these specific fields, right? And so, these crazy ideas began with, like a $10 million prize several years ago, several decades now ago, from, I believe it was the Ansari Foundation, a very generous family who wanted to do a prize on spaceflight to really capture the world's imagination. And what they did was they launched the commercial space industry as a result of it, right? And so there's been, more than $100 million in investment by 27 different teams from 7 countries. And this ended up in a $6 billion IPO by Virgin Galactic, which was the winning team of the prize. And, if you think about the ripple effects just from that prize alone, turned into like somewhere around like $1 trillion in the size of the commercial space industry, right? So if you look at that just from an impact perspective, $100 million, which seems like a lot of money. You really want the $1 trillion impact on quite literally what a moonshot project was. Another example of moonshot is, can you map out the human genome? Well, obviously, this was already accelerated by the industry at the time. So they decided not to do that prize because there was already so much innovation going on. But there are many different prizes that can do that. And you really want that 20x, that 100x. It's not a venture vehicle because there's no equity swap. It's a pure donation vehicle to solve the world's biggest problems, but to do it in a very audacious way and in a measurable way so that you could achieve these goals. And now shifting to global visioneering, like you had mentioned, I was cordially invited to be part of the Brain Trust as a result of me sharing with Alexander Nicholas, the leader of the cohort, the work that I had been doing with my team in Dial In. So Dial In has a very specific context into obviously the paradigm shifts around data centralization, data sovereignty, digital property rights, the things that we want to solve for in terms of decentralizing how data is utilized around big tech companies and then giving that sovereignty back to the individual. But what was really interesting is how I started to see Dial In as kind of the entry point to create a new fabric for all of society. And I know that's a really bold statement, but
Wow.
but hear me out.
Breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. So in my journey with Dial In, and just to remind people, we're creating the first universal operating system that sits across the web, mobile, desktop. It's a new internet, but it also puts data sovereignty in the hands of its own people, and then also allows the relationship between entities. So I understand my relationship to society, my relationship to my organization, my relationship to my city, my relationship to this building. Dial In creates that universal fabric that moves across the board. And what was super interesting, the experience opened up my aperture to what this thing could be with respect to the service and the stewardship that it could provide for all of humanity, and how it could essentially be the operating system that ties together a lot of what we're seeing in climate change, climate transformation, in health and society, with respect to things that we're excited about, which is extending our lifespans, alleviating diseases that are unknown, and curing for things like cancer, and then impacting other spaces where you can tie in deep tech because everything becomes a computation problem, right? And then of course to really broader solutions around how can you shift paradigms in society. And before we dive into learning in society specifically, I'll pause there because I know that was a lot, but that's essentially the X Prize as a whole. And the purpose of the global visioneering, like we had mentioned, was to design these prizes in a way that moonshots could be created to create ripple effects for all of humanity. And then the big vision is, in a world in 2050, how do we ensure that we move away from kind of this dystopian Mad Max, reality, and that we seem to be heading in, and ensure that we live in a world of abundance and human flourishing, like we've mentioned before.
So what you said that really caught something you said really caught my ear, my attention, is the fact that you were exposed to all these different aspects of tech and the cross pollination between one to the other and how everything connects to everything. Is that what really blew open your aperture? Or were they conversations? What exactly was the catalyst?
Whew, this one is really heavy and really personal and amazing, and I'm happy to share because there were so many things going on, because I was networking with people all week. And I've been interested as just an interdisciplinary systems engineer that had been thinking about planetary scale computation and its implications for humanity, that often come in the form of what we've talked about before, emergent adaptive systems. Like, how do things emerge into societies, politics, industries, institutions, consciousness? Like, it really breaks things wide open from that perspective. But then being interested and authentic and curious about each person's individual field. Like I was talking to somebody, Zaki, that was a founder of a wonderful organization that was making advances in robotics, where everybody's thinking about computer vision and computer sensing. He's thinking about skin, the fifth layer. It's like, how can skin and computers essentially be an embedded sensor that functions very much like human skin? Because this is essentially like, our entire aperture and our epidermis has so many different things that are associated with it that we experience things completely different, based on our skin. And so how do you get computers to actually think and feel like a human does? So the conversations like this that you'll have at lunch, but think about it as just one right after the other with like 50 people, where you're just like floating in and out, and then you're in a core workshop. So being stretched to my limit from a cognitive perspective, because I've had to intuitively, genuinely try to understand a field that I've dabbled in and kind of read about, but going like deep into the science of what's possible, and then coming together as a group and saying, okay, well, here, let's look at how we can essentially broaden the aperture, and then thinking very distinctly about, okay, what does moving the needle actually look like in society? And then, of course, thinking about it in the form of a problem. What problem are we trying to solve? And then when you look at it from that perspective, you go further and further upstream to, okay, how do we solve these issues from a first principles fundamental standpoint? And that's the big thing to take away, right? Like, is the problem I'm solving for going to solve for something that's in the shorter term, or do we just go super upstream, and can it actually solve a lot of the world's problems? And that was one. The next is the
Before you go to the
crystallized.
next,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
you go to the next,
Yeah.
so what's the answer to that question?
The answer to the question is, in
And the
order to
reason I
go.
ask is because
Yeah.
when we go to events, and
Mm-hmm.
we're exposed to new ideas, and like you said, the interdisciplinary nature of this event really exposes you to all these different problems that entrepreneurs leveraging technology are trying to solve. Uh, However, when you're very clear on your strategy, you can walk away a bit confused, or maybe even distracted, because now you've seen a much bigger, like you said, in your words, the aperture is opened up. How do you stay focused on the core problem that you're trying to solve?
This is what was the most interesting about it is I've been here, and here's where it's different, because we have been thinking about problems in society for several years now with Dial In. It's like, how could you get to the crux of all of the challenges that humanity is facing right at this very moment, and how has it led up to this? Whether it's the institutions, some of the economic systems that are kind of breaking down, the erosion of trust in a lot of
Mm.
our political institutions, educational systems, and things like that we're seeing, that are very clear to us, that I've talked about before in the show. And so what was interesting is the crystallization felt more visceral to me because of the fact that we have been thinking about these for a long time. And the cross pollination happens, right? When you're connecting the dots across nodes of ideas, and you're like, wow, you're proposing to me problems that we've already been thinking about, but now I'm approaching it from a much different entry point, right? So the X Prize ultimately believes that revolutions in learning systems and how we design for equity and like fundamental building blocks for an inclusive and sustainable society are like, first and foremost, right? And the vision there, at least in this cohort, that made it super interesting was that we've already been thinking about this. So
Mm.
it helped accelerate the crystallization process. But I see your point in that we can go to a conference and our head is spinning and we don't have a goal and we're just trying to network. But this was very like deliberate in that, this isn't a networking opportunity, even though it was a fantastic networking opportunity. I can now say that, man, in my WhatsApp group, I'm just like, I got the best and the brightest of each of their fields. And if I can text them right now and share a paper with them and collaborate with them about an idea, or launch this app into the stratosphere, it's just right there. And the universe just like handed it to us, and it was fantastic. But also from the perspective of, okay, now I can connect the dots with so many other things. Like maybe I was thinking too small. maybe solving for society was a box that I was thinking in. Why don't we solve for everything? Like, why don't we live forever? And it forced me to just echoing Suzanne's thoughts around just being unlimited and just pushing beyond the limits of when you think you're at that point where it's like, okay, well, I gave my life to this, and I could lose it all, quite literally, at this moment. There's more, right? And so just taking that on a different mountain and opening it up and saying, what's the highest peak of this mountain? Maybe it's just a peak that I'm not seeing. And I think that's a perfect analogy to, let's quite literally launch this thing into the stratosphere and solve for all of the biggest problems.
Beautiful. You were going to go to the second part of what you took away.
Yes, I think I tied it in because when you're looking at solving for society, and now I think getting more focused into the convergence of these technologies, society needs to function in such a way where there's community-based standards and resources that are aligned with individual goals. And that hasn't served everyone, right? And so there was this one cohort specifically around saving democracy. And when I say saving democracy, it started to get convoluted with capitalism and economic systems. But broadening the aperture to just democracy, just meaning a society in which people are self-sovereign and also taken care of by the government. And there's an opt-in to that, such that people can trust that institution to take care of them while also aligning their individual needs with that society, right? And what was interesting when we went through the exercise was that a lot of people have opted out of democracy. A lot of people have eroded trust in our current democracy, which is all of the polarization that we're seeing right now, and is causing a lot of the problems with everything that we're seeing. And so with visioneering, the exercise becomes, okay, what is a new paradigm? Could we get to the paradigm level of how to shift all of these things that blend together life and learning, where learners, employers, leaders are driving, lots of social economic change and civic progress through inclusive structures, human-centered technology, and entrepreneurship. And that was the second aha, which I kind of relayed before, which was, what is a universal fabric that gets the self completely aligned with society? And what does that look like from an actual data perspective? Like, can you actually execute on a collective data container or a dynamic data object that ties me and my attributes to what society actually needs, but then also what's needed for my use case, a data marketplace? What people are selling to me is no longer about manipulating me, but just a true marketplace where you're envisioning efficiencies. And a perfect example, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. It's like Neom is a perfect example of, because we're touching on city planning, right? How can you move from planetary scale platform ecologies to platform urban landscapes, right? So platform urbanism. And platform urbanism needs to be like, okay, how can you take a self-containing society that works completely independent of all of the things that are harmful to both the earth and society? The truth is, you can't just create like its own a self-contained city, because in order to create that city, you're drawing in from the resources of other places. And so now it becomes a conversation around, okay, how could you utilize those resources while eliminating waste, being more efficient, reducing all those carbon emissions, and then all of the things that kind of laid out the promise of what smart cities and IoT was essentially trying to do, which is, how can I create universal IDs and data objects so that I have a perfect experience, a humane experience within this city, so that I'm serving it as well. So there's kind of a metabolism going on between what I can do as an individual and what I'm providing to that society in a way where that's taking place. And so that's where this idea of a universal digital fabric that is self-sovereign started to get batted around.
So this conference, I mean, you're not surrounded by entrepreneurs who are looking to build the next food delivery app, right? You're next to entrepreneurs that are solving massive problems,
Right. Yeah.
and are really looking to seize huge opportunities in advancing humankind or humanity,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So, what are the key? I mean, and given that you spent time with the different cohorts
Mm-hmm.
and you met a bunch of people, like you said, you have them on a WhatsApp chat. What are the key qualities of these caliber of entrepreneurs, like these super visionary leaders? What did you learn about them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. We've talked about this a bunch on our show, and I wouldn't say we're all cut from the same cloth because everybody has a different background. They're all like nerdy and sociable and just rock stars, right? So they're all of those things at once. And what's interesting is I could go super deep into one subject and then pivot and talk about something completely different about like spirituality, and they'd be just as informed. So I'd say everybody there was a true interdisciplinary producer. They all knew a lot about everything, especially in my specific cohort where you needed to understand kind of the intersections of politics, economics, technology, and more around the foundations of institutions and history as they started to come about. Obviously, vigilance and the astuteness and resolve of what it takes, all of the things that we talked about, resourcefulness, just being incredibly innovative with, and this is its key about creating a design prize, right? Is you need to design a prize around creative constraints. You have a limited amount of resources. We're not in an abundant future yet, but in order to get to an abundant future, how could you work with the constraints that you have in order to be a MacGyver innovator? Like I'm cobbling together all of these different things, and I create an engine that cleans water in a small village in Africa. And now you can have like clean drinking water, right? So, what is that for society? What is that for all of the biggest problems in health? And so I'd say the biggest trait is just, I've never seen ingenuity on this level before. Just the best and brightest of their fields, but lots of ingenuity with respect to working within their craft and a certain set of design constraints in order to solve a specific problem.
When you're in this environment, is there some imposter syndrome that kicks in?
Oh, that's a question. Not a
Yeah.
suggestion. There was. So I'd say the old me, and this was one of the biggest aha moments in, where I landed and when things started to crystallize, because I'd be talking in a workshop, and for some reason, like the conversations that I had been having almost felt like echoes. And what I mean by echoes is the synchronous moments, as if somebody quite literally came from your past and is now repeating something back to you that you've already thought and said. And it was something so specific to what you're doing that it's like, this is really impossible that somebody could have said something like, oh yeah, well, this is just quantum consciousness, just something like completely random, right? Or, oh yeah, we're working on a way to combine virtualization and materialization. Like that's a very specific thing, right? And then of course, like the out of this world conversations about we're living in software, the simulation hypothesis, self-simulation hypothesis, and going down rabbit holes with quantum physicists about what the nature of reality is, where there's still no consensus, by the way, right? And so it breaks things wide open. And so with that, before, the old me 100% would have felt the imposter syndrome. But like I was telling you in our pregame, there was a strong sense of me leveling up. It's like,
Mm.
I freaking belong here. And it still gives me goosebumps to this day that, some kid from Quezon City
Nice.
who liked to party too much in his 20s and kind of like tooled around like way too much, like has a seat at the table with the best and the brightest of the world in their respective fields. And that was a leveling up for me. And I needed to have that conviction. I needed it to gel. Right. And it wasn't even about, approval seeking or, um, like trying to be somebody that I'm not or fake it till you make it. There's obviously like aspects of that as you're pushing your growth, but it was something else. It wasn't like a huge aha. It was just, I'd call it comfort, just super comfortable in the room, and just my my willingness to want to extend myself and meet everybody and just like talk to as many people as possible, even though I was already like brain fried, and somehow found a fourth or fifth gear at 8 o'clock on a Friday night after it was already the tail end of the conference, but there were still people I hadn't spoken with. Desiree, an MIT professor in climate ecology, just was like fascinated by like what I was saying about society and technology and its inherent problems, as much as I was fascinated with material ecology and the things that she was working on. Right. And this was like already like super late, but I had somehow found fluency, level of interest. I was still dialed in. So I was dialed in for like 72 hours straight, and it felt amazing.
Hey there. We're taking a quick break from the show to let you know that if you'd like to invite Dirain or Nikos to speak at your next event on topics ranging from emergence and the inner game to the future of AI, we've got you covered. Simply email us at info@emergencenowpod.com. Once again, that's info@emergencenowpod.com. Now, let's dive back to the show.
So you come back from this conference, this invite only conference where you can't bring a plus one. What's the first thing you do in terms of dial in terms of your business? Like
Mhm.
how does this impact dial in from day one?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, because I I went in there to visioneer, and one of the things that they, I wouldn't say forced you to do, but they encourage you to do, which is in prize design, you hone in on the problem, but you don't think of solutions. Even if you have one in your back pocket, you just kind of stay away from, let's not solve the problem. Let's continue to broaden the aperture. Let's continue to go upstream. Let's continue to dig deep into what the potential problems are, and then let's figure things out. Honestly, it was very in the moment casual. I wasn't like, hey, you got to hear about what I'm doing. And this is where like I kind of went into surrender mode a little bit, because Alexander and some of the people that I already knew, and I did know some people because I have another, I'm involved with another brain trust. You're familiar with some of the work I did for the Diplomatic Courier. I did that talk in London around AI and human flourishing, which we also discussed on the show. So I knew some people there. So I had some comfort level with already some of the rock stars and the heavy hitters that were already there. But I didn't go in saying like, oh hey, yeah, dial in is going to solve for all of these things that we're talking about. It wasn't that attitude at all. I may have been thinking it, but I didn't go in there as a core evangelist of dial in. Of course, there are ways to tie those, what you're doing. People are genuinely curious about the work that we're doing. And so it just came up in conversation. And so it, like what I probably said 100 times or so was that, here's my story. Here's my background. Was an entrepreneur from, 2000 to 2010, got banged around too much. So had to go back into the corporate world, started running innovation labs for blue chip companies, started to become an AI researcher, got interested in emergent adaptive systems as a result of being an interdisciplinary systems engineer. And that was the entry point. And then now, naturally, I'm like, yeah, we are building the first personal data cloud with a media platform that sits on top of it. And accidentally, we created a universal operating system that could potentially function as a prosperity engine for humanity. And it just happened to kind of sit at the sweet spot of exactly what we were trying to do. So it was very natural without me having to say that and be very explicit about what we're actually doing. There were just natural connection points, which is why I want to draw emphasis on, some of the finer points on echoes that have been captured and reflections, like literally people reflecting a lot of my internal states and kind of, saying these things back to me, which gave me more precedence and more confidence that I indeed have dropped into a new reality.
How much of that was inner game?
All of it.
And
I'd say,
and was there a conscious decision or state that you shifted into as you were going into this conference?
I think I told you, yes. So
Yeah.
a good lead up to that. I told you I was in SF both for just another tech conference right before then. I was at the U.S. Patent Office. I was doing some seed raising, and then most of the time was kind of heads down in my own work. So I was doing the mental prep work like leading up to the event, and then the weekend before I was at Founders Village, which was a founders / investors conference in San Francisco at the Embarcadero, which you're very familiar with. And that was fun too, because I got to talk about Dial In, and I pitched it like 75 times. And I was like, all right, well, what is a 45-year-old going to do, 46-year-old going to do with a bunch of, 20 somethings, at Founders Village. And, that was more for ego. Can I still bang with the best of them, without having kind of like these massive Red Bull nights, coding, but like, yeah, like our stuff is legit. And, the traction and everything, really helped kind of going into that. But I was also doing a lot of inner work, like leading up to that, meditation. And I told you about my microdosing journey, a little bit, which we could touch on in a later episode. So things like that I was focusing on, in terms of harnessing a new reality and leveling up. So yeah, so there was definitely a ton of inner game involved in all of those facets.
So you talk about the broadening of the aperture. What was the biggest insight from this event, or any revelations that you had that you didn't expect to encounter?
Yeah, so I think framing up some of the opportunities, right? So looking at access to technology continues to be a big one. So breaking down physical barriers and providing access to individuals for learning and education. Customization is a big one. So how can technology allow more personalized learning systems? Data informed insights continues to be a big one. And then kind of really, really poking at the big major problems like digital divides, right? Like not everyone has equal access to technology or like a reliable internet, privacy concerns, which I've always talked about, cultural relevance, leaving certain disenfranchised people out of major data sets. And then the obvious trust issues, which I feel like is the biggest one. And so the aha from a collective level is you really need to approach this from like society functioning as a collective, and not to say that you need. Here it is. So of all of the things that we were measuring, like how could we impact the decrease of like carbon emissions, or how could we transform education? How can we provide economic and technological democratization across random villages in Africa and Asia and things like that? Those were all there. Those were all good, but we kept pointing to things that seemed spiritual in nature. And it got referred to in technology and society numerous times, and people couldn't quite put their finger on it. Like, it's like, you can't measure this thing. It's like, you're seeing a paradigm shift that's happening. And I believe we touched on it with Annie in one of our previous episodes when she said we're moving from kind of this binary state into more of this like holistic kind of Vedic intelligence, this like more this totalic, this total approach, right? This holistic approach. And so with that, I feel like people were talking around it, but didn't realize that the fundamental thing that sits underneath all of this is in fact a spiritual foundation. And that's ultimately what's going to cure society, move into the next paradigm, connect everybody together, remove the boundaries and barriers that we anticipate as individuals, and then really create more of that moment where we can truly function more holistically as a unified, universal force in humanity.
So that intersection that you're talking about, Nikos, the intersection between technology and this thing that we can't put our finger on, but we'll call it spirituality for now, is really fascinating. It reminds me of a quote, and this is not verbatim, but Einstein said something to the effect of, the deeper I go into science, the more spiritual I get, or the more I believe in spirituality, I believe is the quote. So yeah, it seems like there's definitely something emerging, and I'm hearing it in a lot of the conversations that I'm having with entrepreneurs, technocrats, technologists. It's definitely, emerging without a doubt.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because, especially after talking to a bunch of quantum physicists, there's no solid, pun intended, understanding of what's fundamental in terms of the nature of reality. So it's not hard to start talking about the headset that we're using to experience this world. And so I'll tie a bow on the intersection of spirituality and technology, because we can continue to get down this rabbit hole in future episodes. But I will say that there's becoming less of a distinction for me in terms of personal growth and spiritual growth, because those two are the same thing. Like, I wouldn't have the growth personally if I didn't grow spiritually, and I wouldn't be able to experience and perceive all of these things and have the perspective that I do, and be confident with myself and the comfort level that I have with all of these people in this room if I didn't experience that. Right? It's a sense of peace, right? And ultimately that's what you want, is a peace of mind and a comfort within yourself. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. I was having this conversation with a friend, and we came up with the three things that most people want. Health, no particular order. Health, peace of mind, and financial freedom.
Yeah, that's right. Peace of mind is up there with those two. That's all you really want, and you're pretty much set.
Yeah. And then we peeled the layer even further, and we said, okay, well, if you could have two of the three, which ones would you choose?
Mm-hmm.
And we both agreed that we would want health and peace of mind. Because if you have your health and you have peace of mind, you'll figure out how to get
the financial freedom.
Yeah. But if you're financially free, but you don't have your health, you're not going to have your peace of mind either. Right?
That's right. Health is wealth.
Yeah. I mean, they're so intimately tied together, health and peace of mind. All right. So for the listeners that are listening to the show, and you took them through the experience of this phenomenal event that you attended, how can they get themselves into that mindset as they walk into a big event in terms of leveling up? Like, you got yourself, in that pocket leading up to the event, and when you got there, it was comfortable, as you said. How do people get into that zone?
Yeah, it's numerous things. I would say there's some work certainly involved, and you have to do all of the foundational things that we talked about, like eat right, sleep right, do good at your job, meditate, work out. All of those things are just the appetizer to leveling up. It's also about embracing the pain. There are times leading up to this, I'd say as early as like 8 weeks ago, where I'm like, I told you I had like the oh crap moment, like, oh my God, typical entrepreneur, like, oh man, why am I doing this? It's like so hard. Like it's like chewing glass all day. It's just nothing but fire drills. And then you kick into gear. And then that's when, you're like, okay, on the other side of this, you're like, okay, things just like for some reason just fall into place. And then the confidence like starts to just gel. But it's just so critical to the whole game, is this aspect of sorry, the chewing glass portion, the pain, the suffering. It's quite literally weakness leaving the body, right? And so all of those things are true. You got to do the work. You have to do the work. And this came up on a couple of episodes where it just like people love interacting with you if you're curious about them. And if you're genuinely curious and you want to know more about a specific subject that they happen to be an expert in, make it about them. And so that's more like tactical. I talked about kind of like the big macro, what you should do. And of course, that's a much longer term thing than, okay, well, how do I shift into gears for this massive conference? Not everybody's going to have the opportunity to be a part of like this kind of brain trust group, but you kind of do. Like, take every opportunity to introduce yourself to people, because there are rock stars, people best in their field, absolutely everywhere, right? And it starts with you. It starts with that inner game. It starts with you dropping into the new reality. And so we have talked about this before, right? So before you can make your first 100,000 or your first million or your first billion or that milestone, you quite literally need to be the one that shifts in order to get there. And that shift is not easy. It's not something that you can like, you can practice, but that's the hardest thing, is that like, and it's not believing in your mind, because believing in your mind, you have to tell yourself something like a lot to just kind of like automate it until it's like reinforced. But I've practiced a lot of heart intelligence. Heart intelligence is very different than mind intelligence. When you feel something in your heart, that's pure. Like there's absolutely no filter on that. Like you can't wrap it and say, oh, well, I'm feeling like I have a good sentiment or a bad sentiment, or I'm feeling empathetic towards this individual, or I'm feeling more confident. It's a direct feeling, and there's no words for that feeling. And so I would say be more attuned to that and the implications of that. And you usually know if you're doing something right, wrong, or if you're moving in a good direction. Usually your heart will tell you.
Yeah, you're right. Beautiful. All right. That is the pod for this week. Thank you, Nikos, for sharing this phenomenal experience that you had at the Global Visioneering Workshop. If you enjoyed the show, we would really appreciate if you rate and subscribe to the show. It helps the algorithms get a little nudge for more people like you who got value from this to discover the show. We will catch you next week. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode.